I will share some perspectives for a better future talking about the fashion industry. So the agenda for today is I'm going to give a little intro. I'm going to talk about why do materials matter in fashion, introduce by design with some examples and definitions, then talk about regenerative fashion, share my own work, and then share some systemic perspectives for fashion transitioning into the circular economy. So hello everyone, Labas. My name is Guoda. I was born in Lithuania and grew up in Luxembourg. I did a bachelor's in nanoscience in Trinity College Dublin. I have a very strong interest in textiles, so in my free time I crochet, I sew clothes, I've also learned weaving. And when I was in university, I did a lot of climate action and fashion activism, which I think led me where I am today. And I've been living in Berlin for the past 5 years. I've been studying polymer science at TU Berlin, and I also did a training in design thinking at the Hasso-Plattner Institute. And I'm also currently working part-time in product management and focusing on learning and development. So I'd say like 10 years ago, I started learning about fashion issues. I think it's something that we're all probably aware of. We see a lot in the media. There's a lot of fashion waste, a lot of textile waste ending up in like different countries. And I live in Berlin, so I also see a lot of clothes on the street that are discarded. But here are actually some facts about fashion. So each year, millions of tons of clothes are produced, worn, and thrown away. So that's a lot of clothes to be thrown away each year. And every second, the equivalent of a rubbish truckload of clothes is burned or buried in landfill. So what kind of solutions exist for this already? Um, we understand that there's a need to redesign the fashion products themselves, but also to transform the systems that deliver them and keep them in use. So we want to focus on redesigning the way our clothes are made and used, but also establish collaborations between brands, mills, and manufacturers of these clothes. So this is an image that I borrowed from Mutaka Shasant, where they took a photo of thousands of washed up clothes in Ghana. So these are clothes that are sent from the West, and they are actually called locally as dead white man's clothes. So they're donated by well-meaning Westerners, and locals receive them, hoping that they'll uncover a few good quality finds to sell them. But anything that they cannot sell is dumped back onto the banks of the river, the Ottawa River.
Wada, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second because I don't think we can see the slide. We're still on the opening slide.
Oh, sorry. Let me check. Um, what about now?
No, I think it's still the opening slide. I mean, otherwise maybe we can go not in presentation mode, but just go through the slide.
Let me check how I can. Let me see. What about now?
Nope.
No?
No, I think I am just seeing regeneration in fashion. I think it's the main one.
Yeah, we still have the first one. So
And now?
Yeah.
yeah, let's do it like this. That's
Okay.
thank you. Sorry, go
No
on.
worries. Okay. So let me just go back through the slides. So this was my presenting slide. This was the agenda for today. This was just my hello and my photo. This was me introducing the fashion issues that I learned about, and this is the photo that I wanted to show you. This is a photo, as I said, by a photographer that took this photo in Ghana in 2022. And you can see the large amount of waste that ends up in landfills. So actually, I will maybe just enter full screen here. So now I wanted to go into something that I learned about when I was back in my bachelor's degree. I was listening to a lot of podcasts about the fashion industry and sustainable fashion, and was really growing my interest in this field. And I listened to a podcast episode with a chemist who mentioned that material science can actually be used to improve fashion, which is something I got really interested in as a material science student. So why do materials matter in fashion? So materials play a fundamental role in the fashion industry because raw materials account for up to 80% of a brand's ecological footprint. So there's this very significant influence on the environmental footprint that materials bring. So there is the water consumption that we have to take into consideration. So, for example, if we are producing textiles from cotton, it's a very thirsty plant. There's also chemical pollution. So, if, for example, we're using pesticides to grow the cotton, that's going to end up in the soil and end up impacting the environment. And there's, of course, the carbon emissions that we also need to account for. So if we look at what most of our clothes are produced from, which is polyester, it's made out of fossil fuels, and that will lead to a lot of carbon, a large carbon footprint. So materials are very important in fashion. And now I want to tell you a bit about my experience with materials and how I got into this topic. So 5 years ago, when I moved to Berlin, my first internship that I did after my bachelor's was at Art Laboratory Berlin, and I got the chance to work with an artist named Vivian Shu, and she was working with silkworms. So actually, my job was to grow silkworms with her and feed them and clean them. And what she was doing in her practice, she was learning from the silkworms. So her idea was that a lot of animals and nature itself already knows how to design things perfectly. So as a designer or an architect, how can you learn from nature to design better? So she was looking at her design practice and architecture as well to see how we can learn from silkworms to improve our designs. And this is how I got introduced to biodesign. So what is biodesign? It's an emerging design movement that has revolutionized the materials industry. So its origin actually comes from regenerative medicine technologies, and it involves the use of living organisms, such as bacteria, fungi, algae, and cells to create things. And a very exciting part of this field is that it involves interdisciplinary work between scientists, designers, and artists. And a biodesigner actually often has to wear all of these hats, so and maybe even more. So it's a very exciting field to get into. And on the right, you can see a photo of the Silk Pavilion by Neri Oxman from the MIT Media Lab, where they actually 3D printed like a round structure, a big round structure, and then placed hundreds of silkworms on it. And those silkworms actually co-designed the pavilion with this with these designers. So this was one of the first works that I was introduced to. And this leads us to how can we actually use biodesign in fashion? How can we grow fashion? So on the right-hand side, you can see kombucha clothes that were created by Suzanne Lee about 20 years ago. She's a designer from London, and she, with her work, wanted to show that actually there is a way to produce clothes differently. So actually, we could grow clothes, and she used bacterial cellulose, which I will talk about more later and introduce what it is. But she was using if you know kombucha, which is this fermented drink, she was using waste from that fermentation to then grow clothes. And this really led to this emerging movement of biodesign. And companies today, such as on the left, you see Modern Synthesis. They actually are developing bacterial weaving to produce shoes and other fashion items. And in the middle, you see Faber Futures, which is also another company who are using bacteria to develop dyes. So a quote I really like by William Myers is, "Biodesign is a practice that cultivates empathy across species and is fueled by cross-disciplinary cooperation." So learning about biodesign really invites you to learn from nature and be empathetic towards nature. And let's talk about the circular economy now and how it relates to fashion. So you might have heard of the concept of the cherry tree, which is mentioned in Cradle to Cradle. So I first learned about it in this book, Cradle to Cradle by Michael Braungart and William McDonough, where they talk about designing things or creating things with the concept of the cherry tree. So when a cherry tree blossoms and creates fruits, and then all of that falls down to the earth, we don't call that waste. We call that nutrients that go back to the earth, the soil, and it composts, and then it fertilizes the soil, and it's a biological cycle that actually where everyone benefits from this. And this concept can also be applied to the way we design things as humans. And the idea is that resources shouldn't be consumed, but borrowed from the environment. And it also invites us to ask ourselves, how can we design more positively and not less badly? So in this book, they also introduce these two cycles. So the biological cycle. So for example, if we're growing cotton, and then making a t-shirt out of it, we want to see, okay, how can we maybe bring that cotton back into the earth so that it can become a nutrient for the soil. And then we have the technical cycle as well. So, if we're producing a phone and we have metals in that phone, those metals are in the technical cycle. So it can't really go back into the earth, but it's something that needs to be recycled or reused. So separating these two allows us to see this material flow in a better way. And this leads us to the concept of regenerative fashion. So what does regenerative mean? So the Cambridge Dictionary defines it as the act of improving a place or system, especially by making it more active or successful, as well as the act of something growing or being grown again. So regeneration to me is something that is, yes, active, successful, growing, and it makes me think of life and growth. So I borrowed this graph from a paper, which I think illustrates regeneration really, really well, or regenerative design. So you can see that regenerative design is at the very right. So it's in the living system development, and it's in the less resources required kind of top right. So when we talk about creating in that way, we are focusing on human and natural systems co-evolving. It also includes upcycling strategies, but I would say it's a holistic way of designing things where we're actually trying to give back to nature and actually create things that are good for nature and therefore for us, rather than depleting resources. So this is different from restorative design, which is more about reversing part of the damage, or sustainability, which is a buzzword now. We hear it so much. And sustainability is more about kind of trying to keep the status quo, like trying to improve it, but not really changing the way we design things too much. And I think it's good to have this illustration in mind when talking about these concepts. So when we talk about regenerative fashion, we're referring to clothing made in a way that supports circularity or the circular economy. So there's two ways we can look at it, from the used economy part and the soil to soil cycle. So I think comparing it to the cradle to cradle, the two cycles that we introduced, so the used economy is maybe more of a technical cycle where basically we're designing clothes and we're trying to design them to last longer and to use better materials, so that we can reuse them, or maybe share them, and they kind of circulate in this used economy. And then we also have the soil to soil cycle, which talks more about regenerative agriculture. So that includes, for example, using indigenous knowledge to perform agriculture, and learning ways that are basically where agriculture is better for the environment. So using knowledge yeah, using basically knowledge to go for a more regenerative agriculture way. Because when we're talking about fashion, we're growing so many crops and we have to understand how can we actually grow them in a way that's regenerative. So I wanted to here mention some of my own work that I've done in this field. So my first project that I did was during the pandemic, and this was a protective face mask that I created. And I mentioned before, Suzanne Lee was an inspiration for this. So she created clothes from what we call kombucha leather. So basically, kombucha is this fermented drink that is very vinegary. It's kind of very acidic. And you ferment black tea with yeast and sugar. And when you're fermenting it, it's supposed to be very good for your gut. But when you're fermenting it, this layer of bacterial cellulose actually grows on top of the container, which protects the bacteria inside it. Which is very interesting. And what's more interesting for me when I was interested in this in developing products in this field was that actually you can use this bacterial cellulose as a substitute for sort of maybe plastic or leather, because the material itself is made out of these tiny cellulose fibers that are intertwined and create a very strong matrix. So when you dry this material, it's actually, yeah, it feels a lot like a sort of plastic. So my idea was to develop a protective face mask because we were all wearing face masks at that time. And it would be a face mask that could actually be composted. So at the end of the life cycle, it would go back into the earth. And that was because we were wearing so many plastic face masks, and that was something I was quite concerned about. So this was a different way of looking at how we could produce them. And then that grew into my second project, which was Kombutex. So it was a leather bag that I created from this kombucha leather. The way I grew it was in these big containers. So basically, for this bag, I had this big box and I filled it with the kombucha starter culture and fermented it. And it took me about 30 days to grow a very thick layer of this bacterial cellulose, which is like a very water absorbent, very wet material. And then I dried it and I coated it with natural coatings to make it a little bit more water resistant. And then I made this bag, which I sewed together. And then last year, I also made some more bags and exhibited them at the Berlin Science Week. So what was interesting was that these bags had a smell. So because kombucha is very vinegary, you could actually smell the vinegar in the entire room. But it was great to also get feedback from other people, from the public, what they thought about it, and share this work with them. So let's talk about next gen materials that are actually existing now in fashion. So next generational materials, they're called, and they're usually made with biomaterials or with these new materials that are being created now. So a couple of brands that exist or companies that exist already today, which are collaborating with fashion brands and creating fashion products. The first one on the left is Polybion. So this jacket on the left that you can see is actually made from bacterial cellulose, so from the same resource that I was working with, and they collaborated with the Danish brand Gani to make this, I think, really beautiful, fascinating jacket that is from bacterial cellulose. In the middle, there's Mycoworks. They're a company that produces mushroom leather, or leather from mycelium, and they make bags and have already collaborated with some luxury brands to make some bags. And on the right-hand side, you have Natural Fiber Welding, which are a company that they have a very good knowledge of the chemistry behind their materials. And very often when you're making materials, you need like glue to, glue things together, or you're using some sort of polymers. A big problem is that you need to use like plastic coatings to coat, for example, leather or other types of materials to make them water resistant. Um, and this company actually doesn't do that. So everything they used is free of plastic, which I find really fascinating. And it's because they've mastered the chemistry behind their materials so well. So this field is very exciting, but there's a lot of issues that they're facing right now, um, which include technical feasibility. So although the new design concepts, sound really cool and futuristic, in order to develop a material on an industrial scale, the product must be industry ready, and that takes a lot of time to develop and also a lot of funding. So a company needs a lot of capital to actually build a lab or a factory, pay their workers, and actually create a regenerative business model as well. These companies also need to be industry ready, so there needs to be enough interest from potential customers. And the fashion brands also need to afford these materials. So often brands want to be more sustainable, but they're not able to or willing to pay for these new materials. So these are issues that the next gen materials are facing, and something also to take into consideration is that fast fashion is still running at full force, and we're still producing so many clothes and consuming so much, which brings us to the next part of this presentation, where we look a bit more at fast fashion and why it's so hard to actually fix it, let's say. So when I did my training in design thinking, together with my team, we actually focused on material innovation. We did a project on this topic, and we looked into the state of fashion and textile waste in the EU. What we found was that EU citizens purchased around 520 billion euros worth of clothing and textiles in 2018. And according to our calculations, they disposed of 1.6 million tons of textiles in total in 2016. So it's a bit outdated, but these were the facts that we found. And we also found that every second dress in Europe is returned, with the main reason being that the garment does not fit. So we're basically producing a lot of clothes that someone buys and then can't even wear. They throw it right away because it doesn't fit. And that's because it's being produced so fast without really taking into consideration of the quality of the clothing itself. And Germany had actually the highest online fashion return rates in Europe in 2022. So 44% of return rates per customer. So a question that we asked ourselves in my team was, does it actually make sense to create new materials if we continue to consume so much? Because will we just throw out the clothes anyway? And so we started looking at basically this cycle, this loop that we found. So we asked the question, why are commercial fashion brands using degenerative or non-sustainable materials for their clothing production? Why are they not investing in these super exciting next-gen materials that are being produced? And we sent this question out to some people working in the industry from different companies, from fashion brands, but as well as people who are like measuring the carbon footprint of fashion brands, etc. And you can see here that it's a complex system, but basically one part of it is that fashion brands need to keep the retail prices low because consumers want to buy things cheaply. And because the price is so low, they also can't really invest into the materials of those clothes, which then leads to a short lifespan of the clothing. And also fashion brands need to stay competitive in the market. So they have to keep producing. And on the left-hand side, there's a little circle of like the material innovation cycle, where we put next-gen materials are cost intensive. Maybe there's a lack of long-term commitment from brands. There's also a lack of funding and specialists in the field, perhaps, and material innovation is rare. So these were assumptions that we kind of we were coming from. But what we found talking to someone, which I will introduce here. So we talked to Anke Beutel, who is a product developer based in Berlin, who's been working in the fashion industry for over 20 years. And we asked her, how would you define the fashion problem in a few short sentences? And she said, the fashion industry doesn't focus on the product itself. Price is the only framework for decisions. Price always wins over usability and quality. And this was something that she saw in her work. And so this brought us to the topic of our current project with our team, which is looking at fashion from a more systemic perspective and understanding how do we incentivize brands to become more circular? If price is what drives them, how can we incentivize them? Maybe through economic incentives to become more circular. So we got to know about the EU textile strategy, which is something that's coming into effect in 23. So it's something that EU companies will have to comply with. And the European Commission is actually wants all textile products placed on the EU market to be durable, repairable, and recyclable. And they want to remove them from hazardous substances. They want them to be produced in respectful environments. Their idea is to eradicate fast fashion, also to promote reuse and repair services. And they basically want the textile sector to take responsibility for their products along the value chain. So our kind of takeaway message was that all of these fashion brands will actually need a lot of support because that's a very difficult transition because they haven't been operating this way. So the incentive for them is actually economic because once these EU laws come into place, they will need to comply with them. And they won't be able to produce with business as usual. They actually have to make some changes. And so currently we're focusing more on the educational part and supporting these companies and people in leadership positions in these companies to create systemic change. So basically where we're at now with the current project I'm working on is we want to develop more of a framework where we can focus on education for fashion brands to move towards a circular economy. And the questions we're currently asking ourselves are, where do fashion brand employees need most help in this transition towards a circular economy? How can we best help them to tackle their quote unquote non-regenerative practices? How much convincing do we need to do? And how much change can we achieve through education tailored to this fashion industry and empowering employees? And this is something that we are currently working on, but it's a very interesting field for us. And yeah, we'll see where we're going to get with this current project. So that's it. These are my references, and thank you so much for listening. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Guoda.
Thank you so much, Guada. Yeah, I had some questions, but I find your presentation very good because you solved my questions. You answered already.
Okay.
But I would like to know if somebody have another question. Kiki?
I definitely do. If anyone in the audience has one, then definitely let me know. But in terms of like scaling up these materials? Like you already kind of touched upon it, and like there's just, more funding and it needs to change. But like in terms of the actual materials, which material do you think is easiest to scale up? Which one can we expect to see in stores popping up first? Is it going to be a mushroom? Is it going to be an algae?
Yeah,
What do you think? Which
that's
science is furthest?
so from my personal like perspective, I mean, because I worked a little bit in material innovation, more with seaweed actually, for a company in Germany. Um, and I got to look a little bit about on the into the landscape of these next gen materials. Um, I think I think there's different um things to take into consideration in this because I think with mushroom leather,
Mes važiuosim į
we
stotis
are
ar
all
nevažiuosim? Važiuosim stot ar nevažiuosim? Tai
oh,
dabar jau reikia eiti.
someone's talking.
Sorry, I think someone is not on mute.
Palauk dabar.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I know. But we going to the train station now.
Can you mute?
You to confirm that. And I
Okay,
will be like in 2 hours back.
Is that okay?
yeah, she's muted now. You can go ahead.
So yeah, what I wanted to say was that I think with mushroom leather, it's something that's already being produced with luxury brands and not so much with like more conventional brands because it's so expensive. But that's something that is available like out there. And a lot of these materials I think will be popping up, but they might be coated like from what I see is like they might have to be coated in plastic or in like protective coatings and might not be entirely made out of these regenerative materials. And that's in a way that's I think that's fine because you need a transition. So it's not going to happen right away and it cannot be perfect right away. But I guess the vision should be that we want to eliminate plastics in these productions. Um, and then, of course, seaweed is a very promising material or resource as well. So, and I think a lot of these materials are perhaps going to be visible in other industries first. So, for example, seaweed materials are already you can find them in more the packaging industry. So yes. I guess hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much. Is there anyone in the audience who has another question for Guada?
Yes. I have a question. Sorry. I've been thinking about this quite a bit because I want to buy like a shirt which lasts me more than a year. And I was wondering if you have any tips about where I can find good quality shirts, and just generally good quality clothes that will last a while, and which materials are good for that, if you know of any producers and manufacturers right now. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So if you want something to last for a longer time, I think the key is to avoid fast fashion brands and avoid cheap clothes. Because if you buy a t-shirt that costs like 10 euro, it's probably not gonna last you very long. But I think simply focusing, if we're talking about a t-shirt, like a white t-shirt, um, if you try to find maybe even a local brand, maybe in your country that produces organically, I think that's already gonna last you much longer and you will pay a little bit more for it, but you will be investing for a longer term. Some brands, I haven't bought a t-shirt in so long, so let me think if I can think of something. I mean, a brand that's mentioned here, Pangaya, They actually do a lot of really cool work in material innovation, so you could look them up. I think their prices are a bit like higher, but they definitely produce t-shirts. And if not, I would simply Google like organic cotton t-shirts, for example, and see what local stores you can find in your country and order from them. That's what I would do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you, one last question. For example, what is the durability of those garments here, like the one that are on the screen? Can you guess? And I would like to know also about the durability, the kombucha. Kombucha is a brand, right?
The
Um,
Combotex. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, of the material.
Yeah. So I will start with this. So this that I made is entirely compostable. I didn't use any plastic-based chemicals to produce this. So honestly, I think if I even poured hot water on it, I think it would disintegrate probably.
Oh, okay.
I think it's pretty how to say, it's very sensitive, basically. This, I used more like harsher chemicals on it to coat it. So I think it's still, I didn't use plastic, so I think it would be a bit more resistant. But you could still technically like biodegrade it. Whereas these, I think these materials, it depends because the one on the left, the polybion one, I actually don't know what their surface finishing is. I assume that they use like a polymer coating, which protects it from like water and abrasion and stuff, which means that it would last a very long time. It would be a very long lasting garment. I assume it's the same thing for Michael Works, but I'm not sure because I haven't like checked what exactly they put on it. For natural fiber welding, I know that their idea is really this like biological cycle that they want to pursue. So I assume that their clothing would actually like be long lasting, but eventually should be able to go back into this biological cycle. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Well, I feel very sorry because we are running out of time. Yeah, we have another presentation, but I really think that it's a brilliant presentation. I think you took you solved all my questions as I said before, and thank you so much, Wada, for this.
Thank you so much for you. Really, thank you for the invitation. It was really fun and really fun to make this presentation. And thank you for your questions. And yeah, if you have any other questions, you can also find me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat about these topics.
Thank you so much.